There's something happening inside you when you see a dog across the street. And you already know what it is. That pull. That quiet, almost irrational urge to cross traffic. Just to pet a stranger's golden retriever. And if you've ever felt that, not just once, but consistently, then this isn't about dog people in general. This is about you. The person who, when a dog walks into a room, doesn't make it obvious, but still tracks where it goes. Who notices where it settles? And if it chooses to sit near you, even accidentally, something in you registers that moment as more than random, like it meant something, even if you'd never say that out loud. You're also probably someone who has said things to a dog that you've never quite managed to say to another person, not because you couldn't, but because with a dog, it doesn't feel like a risk. And that difference, that quiet shift in how you express yourself, is worth looking at more closely. So let's start somewhere you might not expect for a conversation about dogs. Let's start with you. More specifically, what you were like before you ever loved one. People who form deep attachments to dogs tend to share something subtle in their emotional history. Not always obvious. Not always dramatic. But consistent enough that it keeps showing up in the background. And it's not that they all had perfect childhoods with a loyal dog by their side. It's often the opposite. Attachment researchers have observed that people who gravitate toward non-judgmental relationships and dogs are about as close to non-judgmental as it gets often. Grew up in environments where love felt conditional, where affection came with unspoken terms, where approval could shift, where closeness had to be earned. And when that's the environment, your nervous system learns in. It adapts. Quietly. It starts scanning, adjusting, managing, trying to maintain connection without losing stability. And over time, that creates a very specific sensitivity. You become aware of tone, of timing, of subtle emotional shifts. You learn how to exist in relationships where the ground isn't always steady. A dog doesn't operate like that. A dog has never once looked at you and thought, you could be doing better. It doesn't withdraw affection to make a point. It doesn't require you to explain yourself to maintain closeness. And somewhere in your nervous system, that lands as something deeply significant. Not dramatic, but safe. And for some people, that feeling of safety is so rare that when they experience it, they hold onto it with a kind of intensity that others don't fully understand. Now, here's where most explanations try to go deeper by making everything about wounds. But that's not the whole picture. Because not everyone who loves dogs deeply is compensating for something. Some people just love that way, openly, fully, without hesitation. And that's actually its own kind of psychological pattern. Because think about what you're really doing when you love a dog. You're entering a relationship with full awareness of how it ends. You know the timeline. You know the loss is built in, and you say yes anyway, not reluctantly, not cautiously, fully. That requires something most people don't consciously think about. A willingness to attach deeply to something temporary. And not everyone has that. Some people hold back. They protect themselves. They keep a little distance just in case, but others lean in. They love completely, even knowing it won't last forever, and that's not weakness. That's a kind of emotional courage that doesn't get talked about enough. Now, psychologically speaking, there isn't one single profile for people who bond deeply with dogs. Some research suggests that individuals with anxious or insecure attachment styles, people whose human relationships have felt unpredictable, often form strong bonds with animals because the relationship is more stable, more legible. A dog doesn't change based on mood or misinterpretation. It doesn't suddenly become distant without explanation. And for someone whose nervous system has spent years anticipating unpredictability, that consistency lands deeper than comfort. It feels like relief. There's also something biological happening. A study published in Science in 2015 by Nagasawa found that when a dog and their owner look into each other's eyes, both of their brains release oxytocin, the same chemical involved in bonding between a parent and child. And what that means in simple terms is that your dog isn't just receiving your love, it's actively participating in creating it. Every time it looks at you, your brain responds, chemically, physically. This isn't metaphor, it's interaction. Real, measurable interaction. So when you feel that sense of connection, you're not imagining it. Your body is quite literally responding to something real. Now, let's talk about something a little more subtle. Dog people tend to be unusually good at reading nonverbal cues. And that's not random. Because living with a dog requires you to learn a completely different communication system. No words, just movement, posture, energy. You learn what a slight shift means, what a certain look means. You become attentive in ways that most people don't practice regularly. And over time, that skill transfers. Tone shifts, micro expressions, unspoken tension. Not because you're trying to, but because your brain has been trained to pay attention to what isn't being said. Now, there's something a little more uncomfortable that deserves to be acknowledged. Some people love dogs because dogs are easier. It's just a reality that doesn't get talked about honestly. Dogs don't create emotional confusion. They don't withdraw affection without explanation. They don't make you question your interpretation of reality. And if you've ever looked at your dog and thought, "You're the only one who gets me," that's not just about the dog. It's also about your experience with people. Because somewhere along the way, something made closeness feel complicated, unstable, unpredictable, and your system adapted. It found a form of connection that felt safer, more reliable. And it stayed there. The people who grow the most from this realization aren't the ones who reject it. They're the ones who get curious about it. They start asking questions like, what is it about this relationship that feels so easy? What am I receiving here that I struggle to find elsewhere? Why do I feel more relaxed in this presence? And those questions don't take anything away from the bond. They deepen understanding. They turn the relationship into a mirror. Because at some level, what the dog is giving you is information about what safety feels like, about what consistency feels like, about what it means to be accepted without performance. And once you recognize that, you can start noticing where that's missing in other areas of your life. There's also a kind of loneliness that dog lovers understand in a very specific way. Not the obvious kind. Not isolation, but the feeling of being around people and still feeling unseen. Like parts of you don't quite translate, don't quite land. And then there's the dog, who has seen you in moments you wouldn't show anyone else. Quiet moments. Messy ones. Moments where you weren't composed or impressive or even particularly functional, and it stayed. No confusion. Just presence. And that does something to a person. Being seen without needing to perform is a rare experience. And, when you've had it, you recognize its absence everywhere else, which is why losing a dog can feel disproportionately painful to people who haven't experienced it. Because it's not just loss, it's the loss of a relationship where you were fully known. Without effort, without explanation, without defense. And there isn't really a direct replacement for that. People who love dogs deeply aren't unusual. They've just experienced a form of connection that's clean, consistent, uncomplicated in a way that human relationships often aren't. And once you've experienced that, your understanding of connection changes permanently. So, if you're someone who feels that pull, who notices dogs before anything else in a room, who feels something shift when one chooses to sit near you, who finds it easier to be open in that presence, there's nothing strange about that. You're not excessive. You're not projecting. You're responding to something real. Something your nervous system recognizes before your mind has time to explain it. You've experienced what it feels like to be met without conditions. And once you know what that feels like, you don't forget it. If this made you see yourself a little more clearly, subscribe. And if you want to support more of these psychology deep dives, hit the join button. It genuinely helps keep this going. I'll see you in the next one.